Greetings from True Crime Expert. We examine a startling and heartbreaking instance of envy and domestic violence in today's episode. After catching her kid with his stepfather, a jealous mother kills him by stabbing him. This tragic tale reveals the sinister feelings and fatal outcomes that split a family. Join us as we reveal the specifics of this terrifying crime. Lucas Kovalik, a recent high school graduate at the age of 18, lived in Delray Beach, Florida. At school, he had been well liked because of his attractive appearance and laid-back disposition. However, Lucas was concealing intense emotional agony beneath the endearing smile. He had no idea what he wanted to do with his life after graduation. He didn't have a stable job lined up, and his grades weren't strong enough to get into a prominent college. This exacerbated the strain he was already under at home, where his parents' tumultuous marriage was a continual cause of anxiety. Before relocating to the United States, Lucas's mother, Adriana Kovalik Menger, worked as a model in Slovakia. And getting married to a rich developer of real estate. The two had a tumultuous relationship that was characterized by frequent tension and loud disagreements. Adriana frequently spent hours on plastic surgery and beauty treatments because she was obsessed with maintaining her glitzy appearance. She placed a great deal of pressure on Lucas to be flawless because she was so fixated on appearances. Stephen Menger, Lucas's stepfather, was a prosperous businessman who worked more hours than he did at home. Trying to please both of his parents, Lucas frequently felt torn between them and never felt like he was good enough. Lucas resorted to drinking in order to cope with the stress. When he first started drinking, it was only to relax with friends. But things swiftly got out of hand. Lucas was drinking heavily nearly every day by February 2018. He would spend hours by himself in his room, consuming up to a dozen bottles of rum. Unbeknownst to his parents, empty bottles would frequently accumulate in the trash since he liked brands like Captain Morgan and Bacardi, who didn't pay attention since they were too preoccupied with their own life. Although the alcohol provided Lucas with a brief reprieve, it also made him feel even more alone and confused, particularly as he battled with his sexuality. At about the same time, Lucas and Maya Rodriguez, his high school girlfriend, had a tough breakup. They had spent 2 years together. However, Lucas was crushed when their relationship ended in early 2018. According to friends, he was devastated and unsure about how to proceed. He stopped interacting with his typical group of friends and grew more reclusive, spending an increasing amount of time by himself in his room. His drinking worsened, and he stopped going to family gatherings and even stopped going to the nearby Planet Fitness to work out. Lucas made an effort to appear as though he was in control of his life, but those who knew him well recognized that something was off. Lucas Kovalik was found dead on the floor of his bedroom in Delaware Beach, Florida, early on the morning of February 24, 2018. The gruesome finding was made by Stephen Menger, his stepfather. When he saw that Lucas's silver Honda Civic was still parked in the driveway well after noon, he went to see how he was doing. Despite his recent seclusion, Lucas had not returned any calls or texts, which was uncommon. Stephen discovered Lucas stabbed 63 times and covered in blood as he entered the room. The room itself was in disarray, with signs of struggle evident on the bed and floor. Lucas's shirtless body was sprawled near his desk, where an overturned bottle of rum and a laptop still playing U2 true crime documentaries provided a chilling backdrop. Lucas had been drinking heavily before his death, as indicated by the half-empty bottles of Bacardi scattered around the room. Stephen immediately called 911. His voice reportedly shaky but calm. Paramedics arrived quickly, followed by local police officers from the Delray Beach Police Department. Initially, some believed Lucas's death could be a tragic suicide, given his history of emotional struggles and heavy drinking. But as officers examined the crime scene more closely, the severity of the wounds and lack of any defensive injuries suggested otherwise. Although the stabbing was vicious, was it too severe to be self-harm? The walls and furnishings were covered in blood, and Lucas's phone, which was lying a few feet from his body, had been broken in the confusion. The peaceful Delray Beach community was rocked by the news and would never be the same once investigators began to question whether they were dealing with a homicide. The gravity of the situation became evident as soon as the Delray Beach Police Department arrived at the scene of Lucas Kovalik's death. Lucas had 63 stab wounds on his neck, arms, and chest when his body was discovered on his bedroom floor. There was no denying the attack's savagery. However, detectives first thought that Lucas might have committed suicide because of his known history of self-destructive behavior, especially during his drinking binges. Lucas had consumed a lot of alcohol. His emotional state was weak in the weeks before his death because of his recent breakup and his parents' turbulent marriage, as shown by the empty bottles of Bacardi in the room. Detectives initially hypothesized that Lucas might have committed suicide in a violent, alcohol-fueled outburst due to the body's placement slumped close to his workstation and the blood-soaked surroundings. It made sense, considering his history and the mess in the room. In recent months, he had been increasingly reclusive, drinking excessively and avoiding friends and family. At first, the authorities thought he might have slipped into a dangerous mental state that led to his terrible demise. But as investigators looked more closely at the specifics, a number of contradictions became apparent. The stab wound's angle was not consistent with what one would anticipate from a self-harming behavior. Many of the wounds were on his shoulders and back, which are hard to get to in a suicide situation. Furthermore, Lucas's hands and arms lacked defensive marks that would normally be present during a struggle, which begs the question of how he could have caused such severe injuries to himself without displaying any resistance. To further investigate the site, forensic investigators employed instruments such as a thorough autopsy and blood spatter analysis. Lucas was lying on the ground when the attack occurred, based on the patterns of blood on the walls and floor. As would have been more appropriate for a struggle or suicide attempt, they were neither standing nor moving. Foul play was also suggested by the lack of hesitation wounds, which are typical in self-inflicted stabbings. As the evidence mounted, the police reclassified the case from a suspected suicide to a homicide. This turn of events shocked the community, as it meant someone close to Lucas had likely carried out the violent act. Detectives knew they had to shift their investigation to uncover who had brutally taken the young man's life. Adriana Kovalik, Lucas's 41-year-old mother, was the police's first person of interest. Known for her beauty and luxurious lifestyle, Adriana was compulsive about maintaining her youthful appearance. In the years leading up to her son's death, she had spent a small fortune on plastic surgery, Botox injections, facelifts, and body reshaping surgeries to preserve her image. In addition to being a personal passion, she forced her need to look young on her family. When Lucas failed to live up to her unrealistic expectations, she became a frequent focus of her ire. Her harsh comments made Lucas feel inadequate and under continual strain, and she would critique everything from his weight to his social circle. Although Adriana and her son had a strained relationship, it became worse as Lucas got older. Her verbal outbursts increased in frequency and frequently turned into physical altercations. During arguments, she would sometimes kick, slap, or even beat Lucas when he didn't live up to her standards. Neighbors reported hearing shouting matches between the two, especially in the months leading up to his death. Her rage was often fueled by alcohol. Adriana was a heavy drinker, and when under the influence, her temper became even more volatile. She would criticize Lucas during these inebriated outbursts for failing to project the polished, horrifying picture she desired the world to see. Adriana looked distraught but not totally shocked by her son's passing when police took her in for interrogation. She swiftly blamed her husband, Stephen Menger, saying he must have been at fault, despite her tense relationship with Lucas. Other than her rage at Stephen for their failing marriage, she provided no hard proof for this charge. Actually, it appeared that her annoyance had less to do with Lucas's passing and more to do with their marital problems. She implied that Stephen had grown aloof, and her resentment made her accuse him without hesitation. Adriana wavered between sobbing and shifting the blame during the interrogation. When questioned about her own behavior and her relationship with Lucas, she became defensive but occasionally remained composed. Despite her accusations, the police found her behavior suspicious. Her history of abusive outbursts, especially when drinking, combined with her need for control over her family, made her a strong suspect. Yet, without direct evidence, investigators continued to pursue other leads while keeping a close eye on Adriana's involvement in her son's murder. Maya Rodriguez, Lucas's ex-girlfriend, became another key suspect in the investigation. Maya, 19, was renowned for her calm, studious manner, often spending hours immersed in her textbooks or helping at the local library. She seemed to be the ideal student on the outside, diligent, accountable, and future-oriented. But beneath this well-preserved veneer, Maya had a deep-seated grudge toward Lucas, and her actions in the days before his passing portrayed a more sinister picture than her public persona indicated. Maya and Lucas had dated during high school, but soon after they graduated, their relationship started to fall apart. Maya was unable to cope with Lucas' growing alcoholism. Maya found it quite upsetting that Lucas would occasionally wick himself in rage during his drinking binges as a kind of self-punishment. In the hopes that it would serve as a wake-up call for Lucas to get help, she finally left the relationship since his unpredictable behavior and emotional instability were too much for her. But instead of moving on, Lucas spiraled deeper into his self-destructive habits. After Lucas's death, police uncovered a series of messages Maya had sent to him in the days before the murder. Despite her controlled intellectual demeanor, these communications were packed with fury and venom. She had berated Lucas for his shortcomings and even mocked his anxieties. The messages also took a sexually explicit turn, with Maya sending him photos of herself having sex with other men, taunting Lucas about her new relationships and his failures as a lover. The harshness of these texts implied that Maya was still grieving over the split and might have wanted to get revenge on Lucas for the hurt he had given her while they were dating. Police did not discover any concrete evidence connecting Maya to the crime scene, despite the unsettling tone of her messages. During her interrogation, she cooperated and quietly answered questions, but her cool, distant demeanor worried investigators. She maintained that her actions were motivated by her aggravation with Lucas's lack of self-control. Despite the evidence to the contrary, Maya insisted she had moved on emotionally and denied any role in his death. Maya was still considered a minor suspect in spite of her concerning actions. Although her apparent manipulation of Lucas's emotions in the days leading up to his death prompted suspicions, police did not believe she was capable of doing such a heinous act. However, the intricate complexities surrounding Lucas's untimely demise also included her friendship with him. When authorities discovered Kovalik Menger's mounting animosity toward her son, the investigation took an unexpected turn. While sorting through the difficult family dynamics on a frigid, by Florida standards, February 2018 evening, police uncovered a carefully concealed secret. Adriana had entered the room to find her husband, Stephen Menger, and son, Lucas, having sex on the couch in the living room. The case took a radically different turn after this finding. The prospect of losing control over her family had always been difficult for Adriana, who was already quite nervous about aging and preoccupied with keeping up her appearance. However, it was more than simply a betrayal to discover her 18-year-old son having sex with her 46-year-old husband. Her delicate ego and the meticulously constructed facade of her purportedly ideal existence were both severely damaged. Adriana had been married to Stephen, a wealthy and gregarious real estate entrepreneur, since Lucas was a young boy, and she viewed him as the ultimate provider. But the warped undercurrent that had been undermining her mental stability for months was exposed by this romance. Any remaining semblance of control was destroyed the instant Adriana happened to stumble upon Lucas and Stephen. She fell into a downward spiral after learning that her husband, whom she had long suspected of being unfaithful, was having sex with her own kid. Police discovered that Adriana had allowed the secret to fester, building a poisonous mixture of embarrassment, rage, and envy inside of her, rather than confronting them right away. Adriana became increasingly unpredictable, her drinking increased, and her vocal outbursts intensified in the days after this discovery. Investigators now had a vital reason for Adriana's role in Lucas's death, thanks to this new information. She had already spent thousands of dollars on cosmetic operations to maintain her husband's attention, was worried about aging, and now felt completely embarrassed. To Adriana, the affair between Lucas and Stephen wasn't just about sex, it was the ultimate betrayal by both the men she loved most. Police detectives pieced together the events leading up to the murder and recognized that Adriana's discovery of this twisted relationship had triggered the shocking nature of the revelation. Not only reframed the investigation, but also raised new questions about the toxic dynamics within the family. The neighborhood knew 46-year-old Stephen Menger as a loving family man. He seemed to be a loving father figure to Lucas as stepson and a devoted husband to the outside world. He had real estate success and was frequently the epitome of confidence and charm at neighborhood get-togethers and charity activities. However, behind closed doors, Stephen and Lucas had a much more sexual and evil relationship than anyone could have ever dreamed. Police discovered the unsettling truth when they dug deeper into the family's sinister secrets. For a long time, Stephen had been taking advantage of Lucas's emotional weaknesses. Lucas had always been a sensitive young man, struggling with the fallout from his parents' turbulent marriage and his confused sexuality. Stephen utilized this misunderstanding and mental instability to deceive Lucas, gradually grooming him into a sexual relationship after he turned legal. What began as what appeared to be paternal support and care quickly turned into something much more harmful. In order to conceal the sexual relationship from Adriana and the public, Stephen meticulously planned it. He frequently bribed Lucas with Bacardi in exchange for sex, using his loneliness and alcoholism as a means of control. Lucas was engaged in a vicious cycle of sexual manipulation because he was torn between pursuing intimacy and resolving his inner struggle. Stephen's attempts to hide their romance grew increasingly complex as it progressed. Playing on the teens' fear of rejection or embarrassment if the truth came out, he would pressure Lucas to preserve their secret, insist that their interactions appear entirely platonic in public, and travel miles to dispose of the sexual goods they used. But when Adriana discovered them in a precarious position in early February 2018, Stephen's hold on the situation started to fall apart. The already tense dynamics of the household became even more toxic after the discovery, which took place in the family's living room. Adriana's suspicions of adultery were verified in the most devastating way possible, leaving her overcome with anger, jealousy, and shame. Stephen's attempts to hide the affair failed, and the tension between the three of them reached a boiling point. Later, The police investigation would show how Stephen's manipulation of Lucas' emotional condition fueled the household's increasingly unpredictable conduct. Given Adriana's precarious mental state, this discovery simply served to fuel the flames and pave the way for the eventual tragedy. Lucas's horrific murder was the end result of the poisonous family dynamics, which included lies and treachery at every turn. Adriana Menger's entire world fell apart when she learned the startling truth about her husband Stephen Menger's sexual involvement with her son Lucas. She couldn't take the betrayal any longer. Adriana had fought her fears for years, spending a lot of money on plastic surgery and compulsive beauty routines to stay young and hold on to a shaky feeling of self-worth. Now, facing the ultimate humiliation, she felt not only betrayed by her husband, but by her own kid. After simmering for years, the anger, shame, and jealousy finally erupted. As the stress in the home increased, Adriana lost it on the evening of February 18, 2018. It escalated to a breaking point as a result of Adriana's developing paranoia and Stephen's abuse of Lucas. Driven by her severe emotional scars and drink, Adriana barged into Lucas's bedroom. That night, she had consumed a lot of alcohol, as she frequently did to deal with her feelings of inadequacy and the breakdown of her marriage. This time, however, the drink simply made her rage worse. Lucas was no longer only her troublesome son in her view. He was now the target of her jealousy and the personification of her husband's treachery. Adriana, unable to control her anger, assaulted. The furious outburst from his mother was too much for Lucas, who was already fragile following his most recent binge. She reached for a knife and started repeatedly stabbing him. The attack's extreme violence was a reflection of how deeply devastated she was emotionally. Lucas had been stabbed 63 times by the time she finished, and his body lay on the ground, lifeless. Adriana was upset not only about Lucas's role in the affair but also about her own sense of inadequacy. She believed she was no longer in charge of her son, her marriage, and her family. Even though killing Lucas ultimately wrecked everything, in her deranged state, it looked like an act of regaining that power. Later, as police pieced together the horrific events, they connected Adriana's years-long emotional suffering to the attack's brutality. In reality, what had at first seemed to be a terrible instance of self-destruction was the outcome of a mother's unbridled wrath brought on by betrayal, envy, and the breakdown of her meticulously productive existence. The community took notice when Adriana Menger's trial started in December 2019. As family members, friends, and bystanders gathered to watch the proceedings, the courtroom was filled with a range of emotions. Adriana was the target of the case put up by prosecutor John Bragg, a tough 50-year-old veteran renowned for his no-nonsense style. He maintained that her acts were both ruthless and planned. Bragg brought up Adriana's years of mental instability, which included her envy of her husband's involvement with her son Lucas. He emphasized the deliberate nature of the act by depicting a mother who has been driven insane by betrayal. Gloria Chan, Adriana's defense lawyer and a rising star at 35, tried to change the trial's focus. She maintained that Adriana was a victim of her situation, a mother who had reached her breaking point, and a wife who had suffered severe trauma. Chan attempted to arouse pity for Adriana by asserting that she had been driven to her breaking point by the demands of family life and her husband's adultery. The defense provided proof of Adriana's difficulties, such as her fight against aging and her compulsive need for acceptance, which frequently led to violent outbursts. The jury was not persuaded, though. They started to see through the defense's presentation of Adriana as a tragic character as the trial went on. A far worse picture was formed by the evidence, especially the circumstances surrounding Lucas's death and the intensity of Adriana's emotional distress. The prosecution was able to prove Adriana's rage was not just a moment of weakness, but rather a culmination of years of resentment and emotional instability. The courtroom was tense on the day of the verdict. As the jury made its verdict known, Adriana sat silently, her face impassive. She was convicted of first-degree homicide. The resulting sentence, which reflected the seriousness of her actions, was life in jail without the possibility of parole. Although the sentencing provided some closure for Lucas's family, the trial's emotional toll was clear. They were clearly struggling with Lucas's passing and the disclosure of such terrible family relations. Lucas's stepfather, Stephen, mostly stayed out of the spotlight during the trial. Despite the fact that his presence loomed huge over the events, he stayed out of the spotlight, possibly because he was overwhelmed by the pandemonium that had taken over their life. Even though the legal fights came to an end with the punishment, the family was still devastated and found it difficult to understand the terrible events that had transpired. Adriana Menger, Maya Menger, and Stephen Menger all experienced the horrific circumstances surrounding Lucas's death, but their lives took quite different turns in the years after the trial. Adriana had to confront the consequences of her conduct while incarcerated after being given a life sentence without the chance of release. She was taken to Florida's Lowell Correctional Institution. A prison that houses female prisoners. She found it difficult to adjust to her new existence on the inside. She was carrying a tremendous burden of remorse and loneliness. She had previously been a lady consumed with youth and beauty, but now she had to deal with the fallout from her emotional instability and violent outburst. She was said to frequently spend her days alone, thinking back on the decisions that brought her to that terrible night in February 2018. After Lucas passed away, Maya, his high school girlfriend, struggled with her own feelings. She had enrolled soon after graduation at the University of Central Florida, where she first attempted to continue her education. But she was plagued by recollections of Lucas and their turbulent relationship. She had trouble focusing and was frequently overcome with regret at the way their relationship had ended. She battled thoughts of regret and loss despite her attempts to move on. In order to manage her feelings and make sense of the terrible events that had transpired, Maya eventually sought therapy. Her healing process was a drawn-out and difficult one, and she was in a sense also a victim of the events surrounding Lucas's life and death. The man at the heart of the affair, Stephen, had to deal with the fallout on his own. His reputation was destroyed by the affair and the mayhem that followed, even though he was not charged with any crimes connected to Lucas's murder. He left the family home and cut himself apart from the neighborhood. Once supportive friends and neighbors started to shun him, leaving him to deal with the loneliness caused by the scandal. He moved to another state to start over, according to reports, but the psychological wounds from the incident would probably follow him. Those who knew Lucas Menger were profoundly affected by his terrible narrative and the chaos that surrounded his family. His passing had repercussions that extended well beyond the courtroom, acting as a chilling reminder of the brittleness of familial bonds and the results of unbridled passion. A mother's unbridled jealousy and a family split apart by sinister secrets led to Lucas Kovalik's untimely death. Even though justice was done, there will always remain emotional wounds that cannot be completely healed. This true crime expert episode serves as a reminder that sometimes the most heinous betrayals originate from inside our own homes.